Welcome to the Bernadette Jackson Podcast, where we are redefining how the world views women with daddy issues by discussing topics, sharing stories, and gaining insight, all from the perspective of a fatherless daughter. I'm your host, Bernadette of BernadetteJackson.com. Today, I want to talk about how father loss affects your relationships. But before we get into that, I want to share the 3 father loss types with you. They are absence, meaning that your father chose not to be in your life, death, and physically there but emotionally unavailable. This means that your father was in the home but didn't interact with you, and you often felt neglected, ignored, or misunderstood. It's also worth noting that daughters whose fathers worked long hours and just didn't have the time or energy to engage with them often feel this way as well too. In this episode, I'm going to talk about 4 ways that your father loss can affect you in relationships. Of course, there are more than 4 ways, but we are going to focus on the ones that we'll be discussing today. The first one is that your father loss distorts your view of yourself and others. For instance, if your father was absent, you may feel like his absence was because of you. This can make you feel unworthy, it can affect your self-esteem, and it can make you feel unchosen. As a result of this, you may feel like you need to prove to others that you are worthy to be loved, and that you may be afraid to give voice to your needs and desires because you may feel like you don't deserve to be happy or fulfilled in relationships. If your father died, you most likely have immortalized the view you have of him, be it good or bad. Your view of your father usually is a bit distorted due to the nature of how you lost him, and you may not have known him as the man he really was, but instead as a hero or a villain. This is also largely dependent on your age when he passed. Now, if your father was a good man, you will expect every romantic partner to live up to who he was to you. Because your viewpoint may be distorted, some of your expectations may be unrealistic. If you viewed your father as a villain, then you may either equate that behavior as a symbol of love and look for partners who share the same qualities, or you may be determined not to repeat the same experiences in your relationships that you did with your father. As for you, you likely hold some resentment and anger that your father left you the way that he did, which is quickly followed by guilt because you know it wasn't his fault. Please know that all of your feelings are valid and completely common. Now, if your father was physically there but emotionally unavailable, you will likely seek attention from others, both good and bad. You may also equate the lack of attention or engagement from your father as being normal and seek out partners who share this characteristic, all the while wondering why you feel so lonely and unfulfilled in your relationships. The second way your father loss can affect you in relationships is in the way that you respond to triggers. The majority of fatherless daughters don't realize they operate from a place of fear. Fear that their significant other will leave them and they'll feel abandoned. Fear that they won't be good enough. Fear that their loved ones won't look at them as being worthy of meeting their needs. Fear that they'll fail. These fears create the responses that we use in our interactions with people. I call them fear-based responses. Here are a few examples. They can include leaving a relationship prematurely when you have a conflict because you fear that your significant other may be about to break up with you and you would prefer to leave them before they leave you. It could be sabotaging your relationships because you don't feel you deserve to be in healthy ones. It could be staying in toxic relationships for too long because you don't want to abandon anyone since you know how that feels. And it could also look like choosing partners you know are wrong for you so that you can avoid the hard stuff like intimacy and vulnerability. There are tons more, and we could spend all day discussing them, but let's move on to number 3. The third way fatherless daughters affect relationships piggybacks off of one of the fear-based responses I just mentioned. Whether good or bad, fatherless daughters often choose partners that are just like their father. For instance, if your father wasn't around much because he worked a lot, you may equate that to mean that your father cared so much about the security of your home that he worked nonstop. So you then choose a partner with a very hectic work schedule, rationalizing that his lack of attention to you is simply because he is taking care of his family. If your father was charismatic and well-liked, then you likely would gravitate towards these type of partners. I think you get the picture. And the fourth way that fatherless daughters are affected by their father loss in relationships is that it may be hard for you to give or receive love in relationships. The more absent or unavailable your father was, the harder it is for you to grasp the concept of what the love of a man looks like and how to receive it. Because interactions with your father or a father figure may be very limited, you don't understand the dynamics of a male-female relationship. So you may look to outside sources such as books or movies for clues. Of course, these examples are largely exaggerated and not based in reality, but you may not know this until you are much older. So let's recap. The 4 ways fatherless daughters can be affected in relationships due to their father loss are distorting your view of yourself and others, showing up in the way that you respond to triggers, it influences the type of partners you choose, and you may experience difficulties giving and receiving love. If you can relate to this and want to see a lasting change in your relationships going forward, join my Healing Elevates Relationships program, where I take you through the process of discovering your father's story, understanding your fear-based responses, and identifying your transparent truths, so that you can begin to experience the type of relationships you truly desire. You can head to my website at BernadetteJackson.com and leave the message, "I want to join," on my contact page. Thanks for joining me in this episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.